and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for Diverse Identities Week, and that is the Reverend Al Sharpton. As I prepared the bio, I looked at some of his background. Pentecostal minister, political candidate in a lot of different arenas, and certainly civil rights activist. And I thought to achieve even one of these things in a lifetime would be incredible, but to achieve all three is really impressive. The all was spellbinding, often controversial, but that's what we love at a liberal arts college. We are, after all, an academic institution. Reverend Al Sharpton has been a committed and energetic figure in the civil rights movement, particularly within the African American community for over 3 decades. He was a preacher at age 4, ordained in the Pentecostal faith by the age of 9. And he learned early on how to successfully move people to action, a skill that earned him positions of considerable responsibility and recognition. At 14 years of age, and just think about what you were doing at age 14. I don't even want to remember. But he was named youth director of the New York City branch of Operation Breadbasket, which was organized by activist Jesse Jackson, and they distributed food in poor black communities. At age 15, Sharpton founded the National Youth Movement, an organization devoted to the problems of black urban youth, which he led for nearly 2 decades. During this time, he also worked as a tour manager for the legendary soul singer and as a youth organizer for boxing promoter Don King. But it was in the 1980s when Sharpton truly gained celebrity status through his involvement in a series of high-profile, racially charged court cases, including the Bernard Goetz, Howard Beach, and Amadou Diallo trials, during which he organized and led protests and other acts of civil disobedience under the watchful eye of probably both the police and the news media. Building on this newfound notoriety and continuing his commitment to promote widespread activism, Sharpton established the National Action Network, NAN, in 1991, an organization dedicated to providing voter education, services which aided the poor, and supported economically small community businesses. He spent a lifetime confronting racism and violations of civil and human rights. To this day, Sharpton remains NAN's president and CEO, leading weekly meetings at its Harlem headquarters and hosting a radio show appropriately called Sharp Talk. In addition to his activist work, Sharpton is the author of 2 books and has run for a variety of political offices, including New York State Senate, the U.S. Senate, New York City Mayor, and most recently in 2004, the U.S. presidency. What a role model for our students. And so before I turn the podium over to you, I want to call on 2 of our students, Raymond Walker and Anthony Taylor, to present a plaque to you, our speaker, in recognition of your life's work. And
Good evening. On behalf of Whittier College and Black Student Union, we present this plaque representing an honorary injunction to Al Sharpton.
When I first heard about the person I was introducing today, I was honored and privileged to be given the opportunity. With the drive and ambition that he displays every day, he is truly an icon for the African American community. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the Reverend Al Sharpton.
Thank you very much. First, I'm very happy and very honored to be here tonight to engage in this discussion. And let me say at the outset that I am here for not only the fact that I respect your celebrating and dealing with the issues of diversity, which is something that we need to deal with more forthrightly in the country. I'm also here because I could not resist the temptation of rattling the ghost of Richard Nixon by coming to his alma mater to speak. I'm sure wherever Tricky Dick is tonight, he is unsettled to know that Al Sharpton is at his old school. That's worth flying all the way across country for all by itself. Let me say at the outset, I'm going to deal with diversity and also some of the political issues of our time. Unlike many public figures, I always make it very clear at the beginning that I do not speak particularly to college students in a quest to gain favor. I speak what I believe to be true. So if there are those that have come tonight that don't agree with me or don't like me, I can assure you if you go home still not liking me, that I will sleep well tonight and hope you will too. I believe too many public figures in America say what they feel is popular rather than say what they feel is true. And I think the only way that we will build a country that will be better and more productive for all of its citizens is if we say what we mean and mean what we say. I would much rather engage in a serious dialogue based on what we really feel than to say easy slogans that everyone will like and feel good about themselves, and none of us mean any of what we say. Tonight, we are still confronted in this country with critical problems. We have made some progress in the area of diversity, in the area of ending racial discrimination, in the areas of trying to deal with gender equality, and adjusting to dealing with people of different lifestyles and life choices and life circumstances. But we have a long way to go. And the evidence of that is by just the present political climate in this country. Let me begin by just starting there. As said in the introduction, I ran for the Democratic nomination for president last year. I think that what happened in America in the elections last year was an interesting lesson, an interesting exercise in political diversion from what we should have dealt with in American politics. What do I mean by that? I'm from New York. If you ever visit New York, there's a place in New York called Times Square. Now in Times Square, particularly if you're a tourist, you ought to be careful because there are guys that are con men that have a game called 3-card Monte. You'll see them, they'll set up a table and they put 3 shells or 3 cards down. And they put under one of the cards some kind of object, some seed or some rock or stone. And they shuffle the cards, and the name of the game is to try and guess under what card or what shell the stone is. And they use this because the hands supposedly are not as fast as the eye, and they use this game to beat tourists out of their money. Well, I would argue tonight that Karl Rove and George Bush played a political 3-card Monte game on the American public. Because what issues we should have dealt with in the presidential election, we didn't deal with. We went looking for the wrong things under the wrong places. What do you mean by that, Sharpton? Well, I do have a tendency of asking myself questions and answering them. You'll have your chance later. The issues, the overriding issues that concerned the American electorate last year, whether it was on a foreign policy level or domestic, was A, the war in Iraq, the war against terrorism, domestically, where we were in terms of educational opportunities for all Americans, health care for all Americans, and the continued quest for a criminal justice system that was fair to all Americans. Now, every one of the issues, all five that I mentioned, with the broad ramifications that come from those five, are presided over by who sits in the Oval Office as President of the United States. So as we went through the primaries, and there were 10 of us running, and then there was 9, then 8, and it ended up down to 4, and then finally John Kerry was the nominee. It was clear to the American people as we ran around this country that those were the issues. What are we going to do about Iraq? How do we deal with terrorism? How do we deal with the fact that 45 million Americans had no health insurance? How do we deal with the rising tide of the problem of education not being accessible, at least not quality education to all Americans? How do we deal with the imbalance in the criminal justice system? That is not what the election ended up being about. George Bush and Karl Rove, in a brilliant strategy, had us debating things that had nothing to do with being president. People voted based on gay marriage and the sense of morality and values in America. Now, whatever your opinion of gay marriage, it has nothing to do with being president of the United States. The president doesn't decide any marriage, let alone gay marriage. But because we were being hit with the president raising state issues, I realized the mayor of San Francisco right here in the state issued licenses that became a state issue with your state Supreme Court. The president didn't deal with the state deficit in California. So don't act like he had to address a state issue. He decided to raise the gay marriage issue so he could divide the American public and try to use a homophobic rant in the South to try and become reelected and never have to answer the questions of Iraq and terrorism and health care and education and the criminal justice system. So rather than ask the president why we were still at war when he had landed on an aircraft out here saying the mission was accomplished, he had you talking about he was upholding values. And why, rather than talk about health care and education and the criminal justice system, he had you talking about we can't redefine marriage. First of all, the president has nothing to do with that. Second of all, it is not, in my judgment, an appropriate discussion to limit morals to only sex-related issues. What do I mean by that? Again, I ask myself, when you debate the right wing, or when there is a discussion with the right wing, they define morality basically gay and lesbian rights and women's right to choose. That's the end of morality to them. Morality to me starts with how you treat your fellow man, which encompasses poverty and health care and educating children and relating to the fact that 8 million people a year die in the world from poverty. 20,000 people die every day from hunger. And the only way you want to address morality is who's zooming who. I'm asking myself now. Don't ask you. You get your turn. Now, the issue to me is this. First of all, as stated, I'm a minister, the right to impose my view on others. Even if I have very firm views, does that give me the right to then legislate my views on those that may not agree with my views? So the issue always to me of gay rights or women's rights was a civil right and human rights issue. It was never a moral issue. Morality ought to be preached from the church. You don't convert people by forcing them to abide by what you believe. And if you use the state to do that, then when others take over the state, they may be able to legislate against what you believe to make you follow what they believe. The idea of a democracy is that we all have the right to disagree as long as we don't harm one another's right. I remember several years ago, John Connell O'Connor and I were in a meeting over a police brutality case. At the end of the meeting, as people were leaving, he said, "Reverend Al, I'd like to talk to you a minute before you go." I said, "Fine." He said, "I don't understand why every year at St. Patrick's Day, you stand with the gay and lesbian activists saying they have a right to stand with St. Patrick's Day." I said, "Because I don't think you have a right to discriminate against them. They're Irish, and because they don't have the way of life you agree, I don't think you have the right to discriminate against them." He said, "But Al, we're ministers, and I preach they go to hell." I said, "See, that's my problem, Cotton." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Even if I were to believe that, and we can argue the theology of that, even God gives you a choice of heaven and hell. You're trying to force people to go your way. Even if I believe your decision will make you hell-bound, even if I believe whichever way you choose will send you to hell, I'm going to fight for your right to get there." There's a difference between condemning one as a sinner and in saying one must be forced by law to agree with your concept of what is right. The other thing that was disturbing to me in this whole debate last year is how selective Bush was on what sins we were going to go put in the Constitution. So even if I, by some miracle, wanted to buy that he really believed that we needed a constitutional amendment to protect marriage because based on what was moral and right and political and the institution of marriage was at stake because gays were married, and we must rush to the United States Supreme Court and preserve marriage and save them from homosexuals, then why didn't we have a constitutional amendment against adultery? Far more marriages broke up over adultery. I tell you what, George, why don't we have one against lying? I mean, how you gonna take one part of the Bible and make it constitutional and throw out the rest of the Bible? Let's have a constitutional amendment against lying about weapons of mass destruction that's not there. So, I thought it was a card game. I thought it was something to distract us. I thought it was something to take our eye off of the prize of trying to build an America that would be better. Now, I don't think the Democrats, in terms of the candidate that we had, properly tackled that. I told John Kerry, who I supported and I campaigned in 83 cities for, that you cannot dislodge this president playing nice. I thought we were far too nice to President Bush. I thought that you can never fight a political strategy where you have the opponent set the tone of the campaign. I'm a boxing fan. Anytime you have your opponent cut off the ring, you're going to lose. And I kept telling them, first thing is, why are you defending yourself on Vietnam, a war 30 years ago, when we're in a war now? People today don't care about what happened in Vietnam. They care about what's happening in Iraq. We spent 2 months talking about the Swift boat of 30 years ago. Well, we had soldiers dying every day today in a war that never, ever reached the level of justification that we were presented. Don't ever forget, George Bush said we were going to war because there were weapons of mass destruction, and Americans were in imminent danger. Now, I didn't go to this fine college, but I know what imminent means. Imminent means right now, immediate danger. When they could not prove there were weapons of mass destruction, and I never believed they could, they did change it and said, oh no, he was going to do it. Well, that's not imminent. Now somebody would ask, Reverend Al, why didn't you believe they had weapons? One, I remember when I was a kid, about 4 or 5 years old, they had the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1960. That was when they had the instamatic cameras. They didn't have none of this stuff we have today. Yet Adlai Stevenson, who was the UN ambassador, went in front of the United Nations and stood up and held pictures of the missiles in Havana, Cuba. Now, if they could have done that 40 years ago, I could understand with technology as it is today. They can take a picture 10 miles down the road, turn the corner, and go 3 miles. Yet they couldn't show us one picture of one missile nowhere in Iraq. And you still have some right-wingers, I'm sure one or two might be here tonight, that will tell you that Saddam had them. Well, where were they? Another thing that confirmed that I was right is when they captured Saddam, he was in a rat hole with some mice with a 21 pistol. Now, if you had an atom bomb, would you be living with mice with a 21? I mean, if he had weapons of mass destruction, when was he going to use them? The cavalry's here, they're at your door, they're dragging you out. When are you going to hit the button, Saddam? I mean, how calm can we be? We go on from there. Don't forget the war on terrorism again. I feel Mr. Bush diverted us into Iraq. I remember on September 11, 2001, the most despicable act of terrorism in American history, one of the most in world history. George Bush got back to Washington that night, got on live television and said, we must go after Saddam Hussein. He said, we must go after bin Laden, not after Hussein. Bin Laden is the one guilty of this despicable act. I suggest to you tonight that we are almost 4 years later, and we still have not captured bin Laden. Now, I grew up in what is colloquially called the hood. And in the hood, you have high crime. So I had the experience growing up of people breaking in my house. I've never seen anyone, the victim of a robbery, call the police, and the police come. And you don't send the police after who broke in your house tonight, you send them after who insulted your daddy 20 years ago. How we went from going after bin Laden to going after Saddam Hussein, who had no provable connection to the bombing of the World Trade Center on September 11th, no connection that they were ever able to prove on to the Al-Qaeda, was a diversion again. It was a 3-card Monte game. I told John Kerry, if I was a nominee and was debating George Bush, I would have walked every night out on the stage debating him with a t-shirt saying, where's bin Laden? He was never forced to answer why he failed to get the man responsible for killing thousands of American citizens in act of terrorism on our shore. He, to this day, has not answered that. Fact of the matter is, what makes it even more appalling is you're talking about a man who's supposed to have a bad kidney hiding in the mountains of Afghanistan that makes new videos every other month. Bin Laden has out more videos than Mary J. Blige. He even came out with a special election video right before the election. Now, at least if I was president, I would ask the video man, how do you find him? CIA can't find him, FBI can't find him, Interpol can't find him, but the video man can find him. There's something wrong with the intelligence department in Washington. What are the challenges of the day? Well, it is said that we've made progress. We have. progress does not mean that we don't still face challenges. We have just celebrated a series of 40 anniversaries. 40th anniversary of the Voter Rights Act, where African Americans were given the right to vote after the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge as they marched in Selma, Alabama, 40 years ago. 40 years since the killing of Jimmy Lee Jackson, young man in Marion, Alabama, a civil rights worker who worked with whites and black students to integrate the South. 40 years since the assassination of Malcolm X. So you hear a lot of talk about the progress we made now and how it was back in the day. And there has been progress. But the issue becomes, in my judgment, a little more tricky. If we act as though back in the day means that everything is all right today. Tonight, as you sit here, there are still challenges. Tonight, the average African-American family of four still has a median income level 21% lower than the average family white in this country. Tonight, not 65, 05. Tonight, women still only make 70 cents on a dollar to every man in America. Tonight, if you're black or Latino, you're 3 to 4 times more likely to go to jail in a court proceeding if you have the same criminal background, same criminal trial. If you're Latino, you're 5 times less likely to get a business loan. Black, 6 times more likely. Same credit, same equity. So to say that it's back in the day, we still in some days. We brag about how wonderful it is to see blacks and Latinos in high places. It's good to see that if other blacks and Latinos are rising with them. We don't just need to see faces of color in high places. We need to see all treated the same way. So, Reverend, aren't you proud that Condoleezza Rice is Secretary of State? Yes. As long as all black women have the same right as whites and others in this society. Don't show me one black that made it and act like that's supposed to make me feel good about everything else. That would not be sufficient to others, and it should not be sufficient to you. Oh, isn't it wonderful that Villa may be the first Hispanic mayor of our time in Los Angeles? Yes. What would have been more wonderful is if there was no bars to other Hispanics that tried to seek high office before him, and that we did not see the voting along racial lines. What I'm saying to you tonight is that as we celebrate diversity, know that diversity came because people paid a price. And you must be willing to pay a price to continue that fight until it is fully achieved. Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice are there as a result of those that struggled to fight to open the doors that made them possible. Don't get confused. There would not have been a Colin Powell if it wasn't an Adam Clayton Powell. There wouldn't have been a Condoleezza Rice if 4 little girls that lived down the block from her in Birmingham hadn't lost their life to make sure legislation was there. And Martin Luther King and Fannie Lou Hamer and others fought. Mr. Powell and Ms. Rice are a result of seeds planted by the civil rights workers of the 60s. Bush picked the fruit off of the tree. He didn't plant the tree. Don't give credit to the wrong people. So as we celebrate this, know the price that was paid to get us here. Know the sacrifice that was made. And know that it was students your age that left campuses like this and went south and changed the racial order and the cotton curtain of that time. It was students your age that stopped the war in Vietnam against the most popular elected president in American history at the time, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who beat Barry Goldwater with a plurality that no presidential candidate had ever done. It was students that raised the question of the environment and raised the question of women's rights. So as you celebrate diversity, my challenge to you tonight is to commit yourself to continue in the pursuit of a diverse America where what you are doesn't matter. Who you are in terms of your abilities and in terms of your skills and mentality should be the only thing that you are judged by. We are still not in a nation that does that. We can be if we don't romanticize where we are, but use it as a challenge to say if they can bring us this far, if we can make this much progress, with a little more effort, we can make even more. Malcolm X put it this way. He says if someone has a 6-inch knife in your back and they pull it out 4 inches, that's progress. But you still got 2 inches of knife in your back. So progress is relative to who's talking. The one with the knife or the one with the back. Yes, we're better than we was, but we're not there yet. And I think this generation can make that more of a reality. When I look at the diversity at this college, it gives us hope in America. But what would give me even more hope is to see the students that leave a diverse campus like this and go out into America and challenge America. That I know diversity works. I know people that are different than me in terms of their culture, in terms of their heritage, and in terms of their orientation. But they're equal to me in mentality and should be equal to me in opportunity and rights and how those rights are applied. Lastly, I think your challenge as students today is to decide, even at your age, what your purpose in life is going to be. And to make sure that part of that purpose is for something a little larger and bigger than yourself. I can tell you as a preacher, the hardest job of a minister is to preach the funeral of an irrelevant person. That's a very difficult job. They usually roll the body down the aisle, lay it out in front of some pulpit, families sitting up there crying and carrying on. And we are supposed to get up and hallucinate a life for you never lived. I mean, most people haven't done anything to have a funeral about. Frankly, my recommendation is most people should go straight from the morgue to the cemetery. Because most of what they did was for them and it only mattered to them. Live where your life means something. So at the end of your life, someone can say what your life meant. Did you support some cause bigger than you? Did you make some achievement that inspired or taught or was instructive to others? What does your life mean? And if you're not satisfied with the answer you come up with to yourself, you should start tonight, as we celebrate diversity this week, to say, what I'm going to be about is this. I want to take some fraction of my life, and I'm going to commit it to some purpose, so that at the end of my journey will have had more meaning than that I just lived a daily routine and ended up just going off into some oblivious place, waiting on the eternity to come. Students changed America. Students today should change it again. You're in the crossroads of whether America will reject human rights and civil rights and go for what is superficial and what appears to be acceptable, but is rejected in the wide span of history. Could you imagine? At the same time, I grew up fighting public policy issues all my life. And I remember being asked, how could you run for president? I said, we changed laws, we did it. Well, what qualifies you to run for president? Yet you got right here in the state of California a governor who never did anything serious in his life. And y'all made him the governor of California because there was a budget deficit. There was a federal budget deficit. You reelected Bush, but run out Pete Wilson. It's amazing to me. And what was most troubling to me is that the difference between Arnold and I is I never had a stuntman do the hard work for me. I had to do it all myself. So how do we define politics at this time? How do we define politics in your era? This is the generation that you're coming into maturity. This is the era that will define you. 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they will sit here and talk about this generation under Bush and Schwarzenegger. And what did you do? And you must respond to that. Because you will not be young always. You will be the gray-headed ones coming here to see your grandchildren. And they will talk about what we did and what we did not do. I challenge you to let us do something to make diversity something so normal that is not even addressed, it's expected. And to make equal rights and respect of people so normal that people can't use it as a diversion to get reelected to offices that have nothing to do with what they're talking about. And that we reach out to the world, not with bombs, but with answers. How do we protect America against terrorism? Not only with weapons, but by showing ourselves friendly to the world, and the world will want to protect us because it's in their interests. Why should we not? Why should we not look at the hunger in the world and export experts in vegetation and irrigation? Why can't we look at the fact that 2.5 billion people in the world need proper sanitary systems? And we could use incentives for young students to come to school, learn engineering, and send them around the world. If we help rebuild the world has an interest in helping to build us. If I lived here on this campus and someone told me someone was after me, I don't just need the biggest gun, I need some friends. Because if I have friends, they'll tell me, watch out, he's coming down the hall. If everybody in the dorm is mad at me, I could have the biggest gun, it don't matter. Because they're going to sneak up on me because no one will alert me to the danger that is impending. A foreign policy of human rights is not only the right thing, it's also the safest thing. It's the best thing from America. We can choose to be the world's friend, the world's brother, the world's sister, or we could end up keep landing on aircraft faces, talk about mission accomplished. It'll make the evening news, but history will say we failed. Thank you, God bless.
And thank you for coming to Whittier College.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Glad to meet you.
Okay, so let's put you on the proverbial hot seat. Think back to when you were a small child, at the age of 4 when you started preaching, and the age of 9 when you became an ordained minister. What inspired you to take a religious path in life? How did you know that that was your path?
I really couldn't. I mean, at 4 years old, you don't exactly sit down and figure out a strategy. I was raised by a very religious mother, and she guided me that way. It was natural to me. I grew up that way. I never resisted. We would say in the church, that was your calling. I think your calling is where you most naturally fit and where you feel compelled and know that you couldn't do anything else. So it was way before I could figure out where I wanted to go. It just happened, and I stayed there, and I've never regretted it.
And how did that happen?
I don't know how many of you are Baptists or have any familiarity with the church. Reverend Al Sharpton, who heads our LA chapter here tonight, pastor the church in LA. I was a member of what they call the Junior Usher Board. The Usher Board, they pass out the programs in church and the collection. I was the Junior Usher Board. And when I was 4, they were having their annual anniversary program. And the adult advisor asked us all what we wanted to do in the program. and somebody wanted to sing, and somebody else wanted to read a poem. I said I wanted to preach. And all the other kids laughed. And you see some of the kids still laughing. But she let me do it, and I've been preaching ever since.
Thank you. The earlier years of your life were spent in a pretty posh apartment in Queens. Your parents split when you were pretty young, so you went from a very comfortable middle class, at least lifestyle, even into poverty. How did that kind of shifting gears in your life affect your politics?
I grew up my first 10 years in a very nice home. Father bought 2 Cadillacs a year. Then he abandoned us when I was 10. And we ended up, my mother and I and my sister, in the housing projects in Brooklyn, hardcore ghetto. I think in many ways it inspired my activism. Because unlike my peers in the housing projects, I knew a better life because I lived it. So I knew when you called the police, they were supposed to come, not the next day. I knew that if you went to the emergency room in the hospital, you weren't supposed to lay there and bleed 12 hours. I knew the schools were supposed to have books that were up to date because I lived that for the first 10 years of my life. So whereas a lot of my peers accepted second-class treatment, I didn't accept it. I think that caused my rebellion and caused me to become an activist because I firsthand knew that this was not fair.
That's very interesting. And when Jesse Jackson came along, you met him before at least the age of 15. How did he recruit you into politics, or were you involved in politics prior to working with him?
Well, you know, when I was in my preteen years, it was the late 60s, 67, 68, 69. When Martin Luther King was killed in 68, I was like 12 going on 13. And everybody wanted to get involved in something. My bishop in the Pentecostal church was afraid I was going to get in with the, quote, militant organizations. So he made arrangements for me to join Operation Breadbasket, which was the economic arm of Martin Luther King's organization. And at that time, I became the youth director, started speaking. Jesse heard me speak and appointed me the national youth director. And I kind of grew up mentored by him until I went on my own. But he met me through my church-related activities at Operation Breadbasket in my preteen years.
And you worked there for a couple of years before you went on tour with James Brown?
You know what happened with James Brown is and when I was 16, I formed my own youth group called the National Youth Movement. And a young man my age, 16, joined. His name was Teddy Brown. He was James Brown's son. He'd come to New York to go to law school. That summer, he was killed, unfortunately, in a car accident. So James came to New York and wanted to do something to memorialize his son, who was the same age as me. The disc jockeys that played his records in New York said, you ought to know this young preacher your son hung out with, and do the show for him. He did the show for my youth group, kind of adopted me as a son since I didn't have a father at home, and we had a father-son relationship. So I was never really his tour manager as much as I would go on a road with him. He didn't trust anybody else with his money. And so I would keep the money and run around with James Brown. It was a great life.
And some have said that your hairstyle is inspired by James Brown. Is that
1981, late 80 really, we were in his office in Augusta, Georgia, and we were talking about how James Brown, I never agreed on politics, he was more conservative. And I said, you'd like to Nixon. I said, now your guy Reagan is in, he ought to make Dr. King's birthday a holiday. He said, I agree on that, I'll go up there and tell him that if I could. I said, well, he'd meet with you. And I picked up the phone and called the White House, and to our surprise, Reagan and Bush Sr. agreed to meet with James Brown on January 15, 81. We got ready to go, it was around the 13th of January. And James said to me, I want you to do me a favor, meet me about 12 o'clock, madam. He brought me this hairstyle, he said, I want you to wear your hair like mine. So that when people see you, because nobody knew Al Sharpton in 81, they'll see you as a reflection of me. So he had them style my hair like that. Then when he got finished, he said, I want you to wear that like that till I die. So years later, when he got in trouble, went to jail, he's coming from jail 3 times a week. Rev, how's your hair? And we talk now once a week, as long as, I mean, now I'm stuck with it because he outlived where my hair started go gray on the side. He's still, by some magic, some angel, well above his hair is darker than mine, but we still wear our hair like that. That's one of the creeping lines that you have to get a little bit after I say.
Let's get serious for a moment. You obviously...
That wasn't serious?
No. I don't know anything about hair dye myself.
Doesn't true blondes have more? Okay.
Now, having been so many different colors, I can say that indeed it is true.
I'm gonna leave that alone.
Just walk away from that one. Tawana Brawley, 1987. Tawana Brawley was a 15-year-old girl who claimed to be raped by police officers. She was found covered in excrement, placed in a plastic bag with KKK and other racial slurs written on her body. You came out as an advocate for Tawana Brawley, and she did undergo a trial in 1998. A 1988 grand jury thought that she was making the story up. I know that since that time she's come out and said she did not make the story up. How do you respond to your critics who said that you should not?
I believe Tawana Brawley. I still believe so about Tawana Brawley. I don't believe anybody will go out and cover themselves with dog excrement and lay in the cold 3 days and nothing had happened to them. A grand jury didn't believe, but juries can be wrong. I ask my critics all the time, how many of y'all believe OJ's jury? And many of them say, I believe they were wrong. So you had a right to disagree with the jury, but I don't have the right. I don't get mad at people that think OJ was guilty, but the jury said he wasn't. So people should not get angry at me saying, I believe the jury was wrong on Tawana Brawley.
Another kind of hard-hitting subject. In 1991, you were violently attacked, stabbed during a Bensonhurst demonstration. And when you met your attacker years later, which was a big step forward on your part, I mean, not many people want to meet people who've stabbed them. You asked, what poison am I putting in my environment where a kid feels he'll be a hero if he kills someone? And I'm wondering how that attack affected you as an activist, as a human being.
You know, I was at Bensonhurst was a section of Brooklyn that was told to be off limits to black. Young man, 16 years old, named Yusef Hawkins, went into that area and was killed for being in that area. And he was killed by a mob. So I led a series of marches out there, calling on the citizens of that area to give up the mob. On the 21st week of 91, man ran through the crowd, stuck a knife in my chest, and 2 inches from my heart. And I almost died. When I recovered, he was of course caught and indicted. I went to his trial and told the judge that the poison that causes him to feel this, something all of us we have to look at. Had we left racism and violence so unguarded till we still have people that feel this is the right thing to do? So it's easy to lock him up. But I think what we've got to do is look more to ourselves. And the judge said it was noble of me, but he still sends him to jail. About a year later, the young man wrote me from jail. A young white male. He said that I want you to know, Reverend Sharpton, that you were the first person that ever spoke up for me in my life. He says, I'm finishing school in here. I'm getting married to my girlfriend. He says that I want to thank you for forgiving me. I wrote him back and said I wanted to come visit him in jail. And this is the first time in the history of the state of New York a victim went to see the attacker. And it was a very difficult thing to do, to sit there and look at somebody that tried to kill you. And I, every morning, still see that wound on my chest when I'm shaving. But I told him I had to come, not for him, but for me. Because for all my life, to preach the principles of Martin Luther King, to preach nonviolence, and preach forgiveness is one thing. To actually do it is something else. It's easy to say you'll die for something. It's another thing when you face that. Will you really do it, or would you say, I regret that I ever put myself in this position? So I'm one of the few people that know what I'll die for, because I almost did, and I never stopped doing what I was doing.
This isn't one of my questions written down on my little sheet, but that, as you say that, it strikes me. We had a speaker who knows Colin Powell and talked about why he would never run for president and doesn't want to, because his wife thinks that he'll be dead within a year, that someone will assassinate him. What does that say about politics in America? What does that say about
It says that it's a very dangerous occupation. Anyone engaged in politics can look for any day to be scandalized or harmed, particularly if you're of color. And though I don't agree with all of Powell's politics, I agree with his wife. It is a very dangerous thing. When I ran for president, every day I got up, I realized that you are putting yourself out there. I mean, you have people that cheer you, you have people that jeer you, but you have some nut. And some that might not be so nuts, that feel that it would advance their cause to harm you. And you have to live with that. That's why you got to be more committed to what you're about than thinking that it's going to just make you famous. Because with fame comes the danger, particularly if you're famous for taking positions on certain causes.
And do you feel that you're in danger a lot?
I don't think about it. I made up my mind a long time ago, I'm going to die once. I'm not going to die every day. Whenever I die, that'll be it. I'm not going to go through fear, ducking and dodging, and every time you see a shadow, I mean, I'm not going through that. When they get me, it'll be one time, and everybody cry one time, and that's over with. I'm not going every day die a little bit out of fear.
Indeed. Speaking about putting your life on the line, I don't know how many of you know this, but Reverend Sharpton actually went on a hunger strike on the island of Vieques to protest military action there that continues to upset local habitat and residents. What was it like going to Vieques, and why did you cross? You're saying as a black leader, why did you cross over into representing maybe Latino interests?
What happened was there was an island off from Puerto Rico called Vieques that had been a Navy bombing site. And there had been any number of experiments that proved that the Navy bombing was causing asthma, a rise in cancer and tuberculosis on the island. And several Latino activists had gone down to protest. I was riding to my Saturday morning rally, actually I never go on Saturday morning, I heard on the radio that the Latino activists had been arrested for going through the fence protesting the Navy bombing at the Navy site. And I said that I wanted to join them. One, because you can't just protest when it's your people. You got to protest raw no matter who it was. Too many of the Latino leaders went to jail with me protesting the police shooting of Amadou Diallo out here against Taisha Miller in Riverside, California. And I wanted to be there for them like they were for me. I went down to Vieques, I went through the fence. Because I had been arrested before in my civil rights career, they gave most of them 5 to 10 days, they gave me 90 days. So I said, fine, I got to do 3 months, we're going to hunger strike. And for the first 41 days, we didn't eat anything. And that was to really show that we wanted to dramatize to the world what was going on there. And George Bush did end up closing that Navy base. He announced it while I was still in jail during the 90 days.
And how was the hunger strike? And how did you survive?
It made you hungry. Now, I'm not going to lie. I mean, you start dreaming of chicken and salad. I mean, you don't stop being hungry, but you just resist it. But after a little while, you lose your appetite. But the first 3 or 4 days is hard. Now, the fact that you're in jail is easier because it's not like you can go to the corner and buy some snacks. But it is very difficult.
And for those of you who didn't see the New York Times piece, Reverend Al Sharpton has a weakness for fat-free cookies. And I don't know why that's national news, but it is. It is. Do you feel...
It's national news because people like you tell
That's
everybody.
Tell everybody and buy the paper just to read the article and frame it, etc. Do you feel typecast?
Only blondes do.
But I shut you up for a couple of seconds, right? Did I quiet Reverend Al Sharpton? Do you feel typecast in the media? I know a lot of people like to pigeonhole you. They put you together with Jesse Jackson, with Louis Farrakhan. How are you similar? How are you dissimilar?
Well, I mean, you're right. It's all one, whatever. It's almost like all of us in the same sentence, and we are different, and we are alike. I think all of us approach the fight for justice and a fight for empowerment of oppressed people. That's our goal. We approach it different places. We're different in age. Jesse's 14 years older than me. Mr. Farrakhan is about 21 years older than me. We're different in culture. Jesse's from the South. Mr. Farrakhan from the Caribbean. I'm from New York. We're different in religion. He's a Muslim. I'm a Baptist. Jesse not the same religion. I mean, there's a lot of differences. Mr. Farrakhan's married with 10 kids. I'm single. Divorce, as you reminded me.
Newly single, sorry.
Well, I figured I'd say for you that I knew that was one of your questions. I want you all to know, students, I sat out in the car coming from LAX, and she turned around and looked at me and said, how does it feel to be single? I didn't know if this was a date or what I was talking about. But you're blonde, I understand. I think that you're right. They make us all want to mention that we're not.
Yeah.
Want some water? Now, this is for you.
Why, thank you. Reverend Sharpton, how is it being single?
I give my dates a lot of water. Y'all taping this, I mean, this is...
Let's talk about your movie star status. Recently, I've seen you everywhere. I'm kind of an Al Sharpton follower, but you've been on Boston Legal, lots of these popular TV shows, late night. How does that fit in with your image as a political activist?
You know, I never play a role that's not Al Sharpton, so it's easy. I've been rehearsing a long time. They asked me to do Boston Legal, and My Wife and Kids, I think is the other one. And I don't remember, 4 or 5. That says, as long as I'm myself, and it can fit in the script, I'll do it. I won't do anything that I'm not, to have to play somebody else. And it may be something politically that I don't like. So it was fun. I mean, Boston Legal, I played myself on 2 episodes, and I'm gonna do some more. And My Wife and Kids and Girlfriends, I played myself. And as long as I'm myself, it's easy. I have a lot of friends in entertainment. A young lady with us tonight that was in Ray, that is here sitting next to Reverend Carrie Ellison, Renee Wilson. I have a lot of friends in entertainment. They're the actors and actresses. I just play me. I hang out with them, so somebody asked me to introduce me to them. But she's not blonde. She's...
Arnold Schwarzenegger, you said earlier in your talk, you were a little critical of him. And I'm wondering, what do you think about his governorship of California? Has he lived up to your expectations?
Well, I didn't have high expectations. He certainly lived up to what I expected. I don't know if he lived up to what a lot of Californians expected. I think that he's been very conservative. I think he's tried to come off with a kind of nicer image, but his policies have not been there. And I would hope to see a Democrat run and defeat him in the election.
Talking about the Democratic Party, I know that you said in the ride-over that you've had a number of conversations with Howard Dean, now head of the DNC. The fact that fewer blacks are serving on leading the DNC, fewer blacks are in positions of leadership than even the Republican National Committee. Do you think the Democratic Party represents African Americans in the way that it should? Does it respect?
Well, I think that we ran our executive director, Marjorie Harris, for DNC vice chair. She did well, did not make it, and I think she'll get an appointment. I think Dean has the responsibility to put blacks in high positions because of what you said. The board is the least diverse it's been, the board of the National Democratic Party, in many years. And if he does not, it will send the wrong signal. On a policy level, I don't see how we can go Republican because the policies of the Republican Party are antithetical to our progress, but we should not be taken for granted by the Democrats.
And how do you think Howard Dean can change that?
With appointing people, and by really grassroots, state by state level organizing. We should never have had a 17-state strategy in '04. You must run it all 50 states. And we must organize block by block, house by house, and the internet, a combination of technology and grassroots. And I think Dean can do that.
Some people agree with you. You have been working in the past maybe 2 weeks on a new, I'll call it a crusade against violence and violent masculinity and representations in hip hop. Can you tell us more about that movement?
I think that when we saw the pattern of shootings and violence at radio stations, that I was absolutely shocked that the FCC didn't say anything. FCC regulates radio stations and television stations that shows video. Yet, when we saw the recent thing with 50 Cent and Game, and then before that, meetings in Washington, D.C., they said nothing. And the record companies and radio stations and video stations are making a lot of money off of these artists shooting and hurting each other. Everyone wants to condemn the artists, but nobody wants to take the money out of the game, which would make the artist behave differently. You have standards in sports. If McNabb and the quarterback for the Patriots, Brady, had a shootout in Jacksonville, they would have never been in the Super Bowl. So how do you get in a shootout in hip hop, but your record play goes up and your record becomes #1? If the FCC can stop America, because Janet Jackson's breast fell out, which didn't hurt anybody, or Howard Stern curses, where's the FCC when you've got people shooting each other in front of radio stations that they regulate? So what I said is there ought to be a 90-day ban on artists' records, in fact, the pocketbook, if they are guilty of a violent act. I'm not talking about their lyrics. They have the right to free expression. They have the First Amendment right, but you don't have the right to be shooting and beating people and then commercialize that for record sales and give the image to young America that violence is the key to success.
One last question before we open it up to the audience. Do you plan to run for president again in 2008, and do you need a, let's say, 30-something white blonde woman to campaign?
I have decided it's an open question. I'm going to see how the field looks, so I haven't ruled it out. So we just stay in touch until then.
From the audience. I can't see very well. Right here, the gentleman right here, is that right?
Yes. My question is, you said earlier about how you should make your life count. What are the words you live by? And on your tombstone, what you wanted to say?
Well, I think that what I wanted to do is twofold. I wanted to change the climate of injustice. I wanted to be able to say that if it was in the areas of police misconduct, in the areas of profiling and discrimination, I made a difference. And I think in some ways I have, and I'm continuing to. The other part that I wanted to do is to show people that life is not about where you start, it's where you go. So all the excuses that a lot of people use, that they came from a single parent home and on welfare, and that life was stacked against them, I went through that and still succeeded. And I wanted to be able to say that I succeeded against the odds as an example to others, to not let other people determine where they're going in life. You can't determine the floor you start in life, but you can determine the ceiling you end up at. And I was always determined I was going to be in charge of my own destiny. I was not going to let other people tell me what I couldn't do. When I got ready to run for president, people say, you can't run for president. Why not? And when I started debating, I found out I was as smart than other guys on the stage. They went to better schools and had more money, but didn't have nothing to say. And I found it was a big difference in being born on third base and think you hit a triple, and then not being born in the stadium at all and have to fight to get to third base. So it took more to get where I got than it took them to get where they got, which made me stronger when I got there. And what I want to say about tombstone, I don't know. That's up to whoever makes a tombstone. If all that you can depend on is what somebody else say about you when you go, you haven't really lived a good life. If you live right, it doesn't matter what people say. Everybody will know what you did.
Yes, Brennan.
As you may or may not know, California prisons are still segregated, and there are arguments out there that's for prisoners on protections, and then there are arguments on the other side that when those prisoners get back out into society, they commit more crimes. And I'm just wondering if you've had any thoughts about that.
No, I am aware of it. I think that it is a very reactionary justification of an unfair situation. To segregate people in any context of society is wrong. And to act like you're segregating people for their own good, that there's some natural animosity between the races, therefore you segregate them to protect themselves, is absurd. First of all, most crimes are people that do it to people in their own race. So it's not even based on criminal data. It's based on some antiquated reactionary penal law that's accepted in California that should not be accepted.
Other questions? Yes, Donato.
Reverend Sharpton, this summer at the Democratic National Convention, you stated that you ran not fully because you wanted to win, but because you were hoping that there would be a young black boy or young black girl watching television that night that would see that you were running, and that they themselves would have the same dream of actually running for president. And I was wondering why, when you had the nation's attention at that point, why you didn't put more black issues out.
Well, first of all, they gave us 6 minutes, I took 22. In the 22 minutes, I talked about the need for the Democratic Party to deal with the war in Iraq and remain consistent with them, to deal with education, basically what I said tonight. And I had limited time. I probably put out more black issues than anybody that spoke in the whole 4 days there. And had they given me the time that I wanted, I would have been able to put out more. But I had a small window of time, and I tried to get out the best I could. I don't think I said I didn't run hoping to win. I said I hope somebody saw me. I did hope to win. And if I run again, I hope to win.
Donna Lee.
You didn't address directly something I must ask. It is a minority of a minority, and that is voiceless children. How do you feel about under God in the flag salute?
How do I feel about under God in the flag salute? I absolutely believe in God, but I do not believe you should make people say that if they do not believe that.
I'm so grateful to hear you say that. Follow up, just briefly question. Do you feel, as I do, that Congress approached it like a vigilante and put the vote in and the words in and bypassed the Supreme Court making a judicial decision on the Constitution?
Yes.
They amended, I feel they amended our Constitution.
They took the Supreme Court's authority and circumvented it. I agree with you on that.
Thank you. And I like your hair better than Don Keith's.
Given Don King's hair, I don't know if I'll take that as a compliment.
Dr. Spence.
First, I wanted to say that I really appreciate your speech today, and I think that in the American political landscape, there are few people who bring the weight you have to bear on issues when you give your speeches, whether it's in the Democratic National Committee or whether it's in other venues. Now, with that, I believe that black political development has actually been stunted by brokerage politics, by people cutting deals with either corporations or with political parties or with political leaders on behalf of black people. I wanted to know what you think can be done to get rid of that practice, which has lasted as long as, I know that before black people had to vote in the South, that's basically the way it deals with
Yeah. First of all, let me say I heard a lot of rave reviews about your speech last night, and I'm glad to meet you. I think that brokerage politics has not only stymied us, but has put us in a backward, regressive track, which has had me in conflict with some of the people that I grew up under. Because as long as we're delivered and not really speaking in our own voice in mass, it tends to lead to corruption, and it tends to lead to some very limited wins for a limited crowd that gets certain political and economic spoil. I think that when in '72, when we started doing things like the National Black Political Convention, having mass gatherings, putting out mass policy, changing mass policy based on that, that was a road to go. For some reason, we got off of that, went into just a congressional caucus and a few household name leaders cutting deals, and none of the masses knowing what those deals were, and we would see a enclave of black entrepreneurship and political class that would advance, and the masses didn't advance. I think we've got to go back to mass accountability and policy questions, rather than having this as a question of, I'm going to send in this guy, and if he comes out and says it's all right, but nobody knows what that means if we end up in the same predicament we were in before.
The gentleman in the, yes.
I have two questions, Reverend Al. First one, I want to know your strategy if you could have debated George Bush. And the T-shirt was brilliant, but I would want to know really what you have done. The second one, I read somewhere the story that you told about James Brown and your hair. Correct me if I'm wrong. The only time you were ever speechless in your life was the end of the story. James Brown took you in the Oval Office to meet Ronald Reagan, and you didn't say anything?
Yeah, well, y'all do a lot of reading out here. What I would have done with Reagan is kept on the defensive. I think that there's no way, given the 4 years he presided over this country, that he should have been anything but on the ropes, all 3 debates, all 90 minutes, however time it was. And I would have come in and continually kept on the defensive. I would have ignored the moderator, ignored the question, and just kept going straight at him. Because Americans needed to understand what he did to America, what he's done. And I don't think that we got that across. I thought it was absolutely absurd. When we got to Boston, they told the people at the Democratic Convention that we could not bash Bush, which I was the only one that violated. How do you tell people to fire a man and not tell him why he doesn't deserve the job? And I think that that's what I would have done differently at the debate. What you talk about speechless is, what happened is, it's a funny story. When James Brown and I got to Washington, the same trip, '81, and we go to the Oval Office to see President Reagan, and he tells me he wants Martin Luther King's birthday as a federal holiday. He tells Reagan that Reagan is blowing the country. Reagan doesn't know what he's doing domestically or foreign, and he really berated Reagan, which I agreed with. And Reagan, playing the politician, movie star he was, kind of smiled and said, well, Mr. Brown, he says, I'd be interested in hearing your domestic policy. What do you want me to do? And James magnanimously turned to me and said, tell her, brother. And for the first time in my life, first of all, who knew that this man was going to ask me to ad-lib domestic policy with the President of the United States? I recovered before about a minute or so. It was this ominous silence in the Oval Office. I've never let that happen again.
Yes, Will.
Yes, Reverend, I just wanted to know your opinion. Is it realistic to think that Hillary or yourself or Obama may be elected as president? And if so, would it unite the country or would it further divide the country?
I don't think the country would be more divided. Don't forget 59 million people did vote for Kerry. I think it is realistic that a Democrat can win, whether that Democrat be Hillary or Obama, we don't know yet. But I think it is realistic that particularly if we continue to see the economic problems that we see and the lack of a foreign policy that is clear, we have no idea how we're getting out of Iraq. And I think that it will come home to haunt the Republicans in 4 years. It should have last year if we were clearer. When you look at, they want to privatize Social Security. They want to privatize everything. They privatize health care, privatize prisons, privatize education. In fact, the right wing wants to privatize everything in America but your private life. They want that public. And I think that if we fight on those issues, we can win the way.
Other questions? Lisa.
Hi, Lisa. The data tells us that Latinos are going to be, in about 50 to 60 years, going to be the largest minority group in the country. I was wondering what you thought, the prospects of, people talk about possibly having shared interests with blacks and Latinos come together and a biracial coalition and together bring about real changes in terms of political decision making. I was just wondering what you thought the future of that would be.
I not only think that the future is the present. In New York in 2001, we had the coalition with blacks and Latinos that energized Fernando Ferrer's campaign for mayor. He won the primary, lost the runoff, he's running again, and I think can win. I think you had the opportunity in Los Angeles. I think that it's an idea whose time has come because for economic reasons and discrimination reasons, they are far more in common with blacks and browns than they are apart. And I think other than the ego adjustments of some of the leaders, there's a natural alliance there. What is unfortunate is a lot of the right wing is trying to, in my judgment, patronize the Latino community by trying to talk Spanish, but make it up for saying nothing. No is no in Spanish and English. And that's what they're really giving us. No funds, no justice, no fair policies in terms of immigration. You don't have to learn how to explain tax cuts to the rich to me in Spanish when you say no to me in terms of public education funds and public health care and all of that. So let's not get cute and try to say because I know your language that I'm like you, when that is not in fact the case. George Bush is wrong in Spanish or in English.
That's you.
Could you discuss the ramifications of the fact that George Bush tends to act as a sole voice and representation of America across the world, and the impact of that on Americans domestically and the world views of Americans domestically?
The impact, I think, when you have a president that says he makes a unilateral decision to go into Iraq and has flawed intelligence and outright misinformation, the world sees all of us represented by someone who is unfair and unjust. And I think that the arrogance he's displayed has hurt America's standing around the world. There's no question in my mind. And I think that we have to take a real look at how we're perceived around the world, given the character and the leadership he's projected, and he acts as though, as you say, he's the sole voice of the American public.
It's Kevin.
Hi, Reverend Sharpton. Recently, the mayor of Oakland, Jerry Brown, imposed an 11 p.m. curfew on ex-convicts, and I was curious as to what your thoughts were on that.
Well, I don't know much about his reasoning, but I would say any kind, first of all, I'm very sensitive about people that have done their time having to do more time in the streets. If you went to jail, did your time, when you get out, it's almost double jeopardy if you have to live a different life than others. So I don't understand his rationale there. And I'm very sensitive, even about the rights of felons to vote. If you've done your time, you've done your time. And then what ex-convicts are we talking about? Are the people from Enron? They're not going to be allowed to get out after 11 o'clock? I mean, you have a lot of ex-cons in Beverly Hills, I'm sure. They leave home at 11 o'clock at night, not get back in time. So it's interesting when they impose these curfews at.
Let's take two more questions. The woman in the back. The blonde-haired woman in the back. Sorry, I didn't see
You couldn't resist that.
Administration have been talking about spreading democracy in the Middle East, to Lebanon and Iraq and Palestine and so on. And the Middle East or the Muslim world believe this is another form of colonization and controlling. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that anytime you impose your will and impose leadership that you choose, it is colonialism. And what is interesting to me is the people that want to bring democracy, but don't want to perfect democracy right here at home. You know, for this president to be concerned about democracy in the Middle East, but wasn't concerned about it in Ohio, is a glaring contradiction. To have soldiers die to protect the right of voters in the capital of Iraq and Baghdad, but he opposes the federal right to vote for the people in the capital of the United States in Washington, D.C. is a glaring contradiction. So I think that the reason why many in the Middle East wonder if it's colonialism is because of who's bearing the gift. Is certainly not trying to practice that at home.
One last question. Yes, Mike?
Reverend, why didn't John Kerry call George Bush a liar in the debates? What was his reasoning for that? And where do you see the Democrats going strategically in the next elections? How are they going to win?
I think, well, let me ask you the second question first. I think the way the Democrats win is a 50-state strategy, a grassroots strategy, and a people move. The second thing that I've recommended is we not run a personality politic where we just run candidates. We need to put state initiatives on the ballot. Just like they put gay marriage on the ballot, we should put minimum wage on the ballot. Right of organizers, right of workers to organize on the ballot. We're going to put policy issues on the ballot that will bring a vote out that will then also vote for our candidates. For your first question, why did John Kerry call Bush a liar? I'll give you John Kerry's phone number because I'm still waiting on that answer.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I heard some.
That was Richard Nixon's ghost.
Reverend Sharpton, as I can see a lot of people here are taking the Democratic stand and everything like that. I've got two questions for you. One, you were talking about how President Bush was always kind of averting it, but weren't you yourself and a lot of the other candidates averting the truth at hand? Weren't we at war at that point during the democracy? And weren't you going back and looking at Osama bin Laden, which was something previously a couple of years before? And two, I've got a second point. Going back to what you were talking about with the rap industry and the fight, why is it now that people are starting, especially you, starting to look at that when rap artists have been out on the stage touting weapons and having armor and various things like that, and promoting things like that? Why is it now that something's happened? Thank you.
I don't know which one I would answer.
Yes or no?
First, the war in Iraq did not happen a long time after bin Laden. In fact, Bush said that we had to go because we were in imminent danger and there was a connection to Al Qaeda. The war in Iraq started around 2002. We ran starting 2003. That's not a long time after. David, I know that you're young, but 6-7 months is really not that long. In terms of the hip-hop industry, you know, I had the first hip-hop summit at my headquarters in 2000. We have been on this a long time. What I don't understand is why the FCC is not on it. I'm saying today what I've said for years. Hip-hop started as a social movement against the powers that be, Public Enemy and others. Fight the power. Now we fight each other. And the issue for me is why the federal government, why Michael Powell was more upset with Janet Jackson's wardrobe than he is with bloodshed in front of these radio stations. That's all I'm saying.